president in the ANC. Where there is less contestation are for positions such as Treasurer General, Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General. We'll take a look at that very shortly with Lihle Ngobozi, who's a political analyst, and Abongile Dumako, who is with the SABC, taking a very close look at the developments leading up to Nasrec. Very important story that we're covering tonight. The US primary elections are, so to say, done, right? Outstanding results in states such as Arizona and Georgia. Georgia being a key state, right? Where we saw egg in the face of Herschel Walker, for instance, running off against Stacey Abrams. This is Stacey Abrams' third attempt at this run in the state of Georgia, predominantly and historically a Republican state. But Stacey Abrams fighting tooth and nail for voter right protection in the state of Georgia, for instance, may see the fruits bear thereof, right? Young voters turning out in their numbers. Two very big issues, 6 issues, but 2 bigger than the rest, as the polls indicate to us, right? Abortion rights was a big issue. Almost as big as, in fact, in some instances, bigger than inflation, cost of living, and economic prosperity for a lot of middle class and working class Americans. That's what they voted for the Senate seats that were up for grabs, as well as obviously the House of Representative seats that were up for grabs. But what we're seeing is a resurgence in some states of Republican right-wing sentiment, although not as large as we thought it would be. Very importantly, is the voters are starting to reject the Republican Party of Donald Trump, so to speak. That is to say, the candidates that Donald Trump endorsed, the candidates that aligned themselves with that brand of conservative politics, have been losing. Importantly so. But the candidates that align themselves as traditional Republicans who are not too far right, Republicans that are in the Tea Party sense Republican, seemingly are starting to resurge in the party and in the polls. And that is an important indicator for the runoff for presidency very, very soon. The question then is, sure, it will not be Donald Trump that will be victorious against candidates such as Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. But who will it be? Has the Republican chosen their new type of Republican branded leader? Just not yet, but there are indications coming out of these polls. That and all more coming up on the show this evening. Again, you can be a part of it. 086 000 2032, 086 000 2032. Let's start the show.
Here, there, and everywhere. SAfm 104.4 FM in Durban. This week, today with Oliver Dickson.
And of course, you can stream the show live. We are live on all our digital platforms. So you can stream the show live on YouTube. Just search for @SAfm Radio over there. You can stream this live on our Facebook and Twitter channels as well. Also at SAfm Radio. Tweet me directly at Oliver_speaking on Twitter and Oliver Dickson on Facebook. Let's take a look at our first story. Again, the readiness of the ANC to host this event is as big as the event itself, right? That is to say, the elective conference credibility is reliant on the technical processes. Has the ANC gotten that right? Abongile Dumako, SABC journalist, is with us. Abongile, there's been a lot of speculation around whether or not branches would have held their BGMs on time, and turns out many of them did. Whether or not, members of the ANC would have gotten their credentials sorted out in time, not just for the BGMs, but also in itself for the elective conference. Whether or not the party can even afford it. The party coming out this week saying that we can't actually afford to host journalists. They need to foot the cost for that. Typically in the past, the ANC would have carried the cost for that, setting up the media village for journalists, for instance. So the credibility of the organization's finances clearly has had an impact on how these things have run. But whether that has impacted the credibility of the electoral process in the elective conference is yet to be determined. But taking a temperature check within the ANC, what is your feeling around whether or not the party's finances leading up to this process and its clerical readiness, do you think that will have an impact on the credibility of the electoral outcome?
Good evening. Certainly, there's been a lot of noise in as far as the state of finances within the ANC. We've seen for a number of times workers or employees of the organization taking to the streets picketing during lunchtime to express their, dissatisfaction on how things have been unfolding in the ANC when it comes to the financial issues. It's difficult then to determine, as Abongile Dumago, as to basically will they be able to have a successful conference based on the fact that they've got challenges with finances. But the Treasurer General of the party, Paul Mashatile, will be delivering the Treasurer's report to this NEC meeting underway here in Nazareth, south of Johannesburg, which is actually the event where the conference will be taking place. He's actually going to deliver this report, then it will get to be adopted, the same report that will be tabled during the national conference, which is to take place next month. But important to make mention is the fact that the ANC has been over and over, including its spokesperson, Pule Mabe, assuring us even during the course of the week when Paul Mashatile, accompanied by Gwen Ramokgopa, took to Nasrec to have a walkabout where Nasrec would be the host venue. They did say with all the logistics and all that needs to be sort of done in preparation for a conference has been done. So it gives them an assurance as the party, and of course the members of the ANC must be rest assured that the conference will be a success.
Yeah, a lot of changes has taken place between the last conference and this conference. Things such as, for instance, members having to declare internally where they receive their funds from, and members, for instance, not being allowed to use funds for certain things, which is borderline vote buying, as the party argues. That limits very, very strongly how candidates are able to canvass for themselves or for their slates. What has been the sentiment from party members about this change?
Certainly, with regards to the fact that the ANC seeks to have an open sort of approach when it comes to who is being donated what by who, as the campaigning will intensify between now and the 16th of December. We do understand that the chairperson of the Electoral Committee of the ANC, Kgalema Motlanthe, is going to, after all the processes have been done, like for instance the PGMs have closed, the nominations have been consolidated. Now the provincial general councils will sit and then open those envelopes and then consolidate all the names that would have been nominated by branches, and then there will be a representative of what the province, the different 9 provinces believe should be those that are appearing on the ballot paper. And of course, subsequently, Motlanthe then will come to get to know who are those who are going to be vying for the top 6 position, including the National Executive Committee members. Then they will have to declare to the party who is basically behind their donations. If there happens to be anything untoward in as far as those declarations are concerned, then action will be taken against those, contenders or those who are vying for those positions in the ANC. Something that members of the NEC in particular that we've had an opportunity to interact with today and before today, they're actually saying that it's the right way because it will actually assist a great deal in alleviating this notion that continues to make headlines as well, that some ANC members who vow for senior positions in the party are willing to go the extra mile and dig deep in their pockets to make sure that the voting processes favor them. And of course, it will come to a point where people will be saying that the bigger your pocket, the more chances you have to be in the leadership role of the ANC. So there is a general view that maybe this is the right way to go. It's a first of its kind. Kgalema Motlanthe is the chairperson. Yeah. We'll wait and see if at all these efforts will see, say, a limit or a decrease when it comes to vote buying within the ANC and its conferences.
Yeah. Another big issue in the last couple of months is whether or not the step-aside application would have had a massive and adverse impact on the electoral credibility of the ANC. That issue seems to have gone quiet over the last couple of weeks, in the last 2 months, especially after the delay once again of Ace Magashule's case in Bloemfontein High Court, for instance, to next year, meaning that he has no clarity on that, meaning he can't contest. The KZN province having come up and said we're not so sure about the step aside application within the ANC. Is that still an issue that could potentially derail the elective conference and put a blemish on its credibility?
Surprise, just today, in fact, as I'm currently speaking to you, the NEC here in Nazareth is busy deliberating on the very step-aside issue, whether or not the incumbent President Cyril Ramaphosa should or should not step aside. He actually did during his political report as he was opening the NEC meeting earlier on the day, talk about the very Phala farm saga, saying that he actually is leaving it to the floor for NEC members. Sources inside that meeting telling us that he said people must raise their hand and say he must step aside and give reasons as to why he should step aside. So I'm trying to sort of differ with you a bit, Oliver, when it comes to the fact that this thing did die down. It has not. As well, looking at Gauteng ANC, Panyazali Sophie, just a couple of weeks ago, coming out strongly to say it needs to be relooked, it needs to be changed, how it's been being implemented. You've had your Lindy Wesisulu also vying for the presidential position, talking to my colleague, Zwandile Mbeje, saying that, in fact, it's okay that they have this step-aside rule. But how it's being implemented and how selective it is a challenge. We've got Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who's also eyeing to be the next president of the party, saying that it would seem that he's actually targeting certain individuals, saying that it's an embarrassment for the party. Because if you look outside of the ANC then and look at the state of the law in South Africa, the fact that there's always postponement, the fact that there's always delays in cases is not fair now onto ANC members who want to be part of the organization or the movement and be part of this glorious movement, she said. So now saying that then this coming election, this coming conference needs to really deliberate on the implementation of the whole step-aside issue, because the idea is good, but the implementation is the one that is seemingly causing a distortion.
Another thing that could potentially, and here I want us to play a little bit of speculative politics, because it is important that we consider the scenarios, right? Because it could potentially happen and it could potentially have a massive impact on the elective conference. Should the public protector release a report on Phala before the elective conference, let's say it happens hypothetically before the end of this month, and let's say the report adversely finds against the president, obviously they'll take the report under review and consider their legal options, which almost likely will be to take the report under review in the courts, but it will have an adverse impact as far as optics are concerned for the president, right? The step-aside rule is very clear that the charge must come from the NPA for the step-aside rule to be triggered and applied upon a certain member. But a adverse finding from the public protector has an equally morally impugning impact as the NPA would, right? Yet that wouldn't trigger the step-aside rule, because that's not what the rule speaks to. Although the gravity will be equally as important, it creates a grey area, I would think, and certainly would have the top 6 members, or at least the top 5 members of the ANC, as well as the sitting NEC, to have to deliberate on what the implication thereof would be. How do you speculatively see this playing out, should hypothetically the public protector release a report before the elective conference and that being adversely finding towards the president?
The very same issue was raised by a former president of the ANC, Thabo Mbeki, a couple of weeks ago, and he was actually under heavy scrutiny by Gwede Mandashe, the national chairperson of the party, saying that they must not use public platforms to critique the president. Something that I found very interesting, because it would seem this move or notion or belief that when an ANC president is sitting on the chair, he has to be protected at all costs. So wait and see, Oliver, really to whether or not when the acting public protector releases a report, what would happen. Just tomorrow, in fact, to be quite immediate, Paul Mashatile, the Treasurer General of the ANC, has been handed over the Integrity Commission's report on the issue of Phala. There are pronouncements in that report. There are conclusions and recommendations in that report. By Sunday, we would know whether or not President Ramaphosa is under a darker cloud more than he is now with the whole Phala farm saga. Of course, having opened up in the NEC today to say this is what happened. I leave it to you as NEC to decide. Yes, you can't step aside until you are charged. President Cyril Ramaphosa has not been formally charged. So, as Abongile Dumago sitting here right now, it would be difficult for me to say certainly this would end up leading to this far end of the equation, or it might see President Ramaphosa being axed before the conference, or what would really happen. But we understand that thus far he has not been formally charged.
Just a final theme. Let's take a look at some of the slates and the factions and the front runners per position, starting with the presidency. There were many hopefuls. There's Willem Kize, Cyril Ramaphosa, Lindiwe Sisulu, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma. It's starting to emerge who is ahead of who as far as branch favor is concerned. It's quite clear that Cyril Ramaphosa is a favorite. It's quite clear that Willem Kize is in serious contention here. Less clear about where Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma as well as Lindiwe Sisulu are standing at the moment. What is your assessment of the presidential race?
Presidential race is difficult to say, Oliver. Let me clarify how I mean. Because thus far, the branches have made their nominations. They are yet to be opened by the provincial general councils. We don't know exactly what is contained there. We've seen KwaZulu-Natal making their pronouncements. We've seen the Eastern Cape making their pronouncement at some point. We've seen Limpopo was actually one of the first. But it was, to be quite honest, just leadership, for a lack of a better word, being proactive, basically trying to sort of give a sense of what they would like to see happen in as far as the top 6 leadership position is concerned. But it goes back to this view from the ANC that Amandla Asemasebeni, the branches are the ones who are going to determine what should happen for the ANC. You can have your provincial, regional, and national leaders vowing for whoever that they want to see appearing on the ballot paper and being voted for. But the branches have got a say. There's also this rule in the ANC that you might have been nominated nationally and match the threshold. There's an opportunity that is given for anyone who might possibly be raised from the floor for a particular position, be it president, secretary general, or whatever position. And then if they meet that threshold, they subsequently appear on the ballot paper. So with that information, it would really be a bit of a steep hill for any of those who are contending, because it's not a given that you would have been pronounced by a province, by a chairperson of a province, yet the branches have not yet come to to pronounce who they want to see, because really the essence is what the branches are wanting to pronounce. But yes, fair enough with what we've seen transpire now in terms of the media coverage that we've seen amongst those contenders, it would seem, repeat, it would seem Cyril Ramaphosa is the most favored one. Surprises, I think that we live in, because we also understand that Dr. Willem Kize has got a full backup support from KwaZulu-Natal. The Eastern Cape somewhat is divided on whether or not it should be Willem Kize or Cyril Ramaphosa. He's got Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, who's not really supported in KwaZulu-Natal, but we've seen in Nkandla, in the form of former President Jacob Zuma, actually saying that she needs to be supported. I'm trying to push this notion that even if you look at Lindiwe Sisulu, we understand that Gauteng, in particular Tshwane region, are vowing for her to be the next president. We wait and see. Come the 16th of December, we shall be there as SABC witnessing what's going to transpire. Surprises are really likely to come out of that conference.
Has the traffic cleared for the deputy president position?
With David Mabuza not really coming forth, but just saying that if the branches of the ANC still feel that he should serve, he's ready to serve for the organization. You've got Paul Mashatile, who's been pronounced by several provinces, by several leagues of the ANC, your Women's League, your Youth League, your Veterans League, saying that they want him to be the deputy president of the party. That one, I wouldn't say there's much of a traffic, because thus far, even what's his name, from the Eastern Cape, current chairperson there, Oscar Mabuyane, has had his hand risen for the deputy president position, but we don't see much of that now gaining momentum. We've had Mamuloko Kubai, who actually launched a campaign in Soweto a few months ago, but we don't see much of resonance in as far as that is concerned. We've got Ronald Lamula, also having been nominated by Mpumalanga, the very same province that David Mabuza comes from. So the traffic would seem it's kind of losing momentum. It's kind of clearing, because Paul Mashatile would seem to be the one who's kind of is taking the throne to become the deputy president. Again, surprise, you might see something that we didn't expect coming from the floor. Yeah,
another contentious position is that of Secretary General, and there it seems to be a Fikile Mbalula versus Malusi Gigaba show.
There's Fikile Mbalula, there's Malusi Gigaba, there's Phumulo Masualle, who's also said that he's willing to give it a try. Remember, even KwaZulu-Natal did make a mention of his name. So some are saying that Balula started his campaign rather quite late. We don't know whether that will have an advantage or a disadvantage. But yes, Malusi Gigaba did make mention of the fact that he's been approached for position, and then he says, who is he to deny the ANC an opportunity to give him a chance to serve, because it's all about serving the people. So it's a matter of waiting and see. Again, Oliver, I'm scared of this speculation.
Yeah.
I'm scared of this speculation because I don't want our listeners to say Abongile Tumago had said on SAfm and then things turn out to be something totally different. A conference is not easy to predict because the numbers will always change on the floor, because there's this thing that says anyone being nominated on the floor, hands are up, and then they are seconded, and then the voting starts, and then they win, and they wouldn't have been even on anyone's slate.
For that in recent history, I don't remember it to be the case that anyone has been successfully nominated and voted in from the floor. It typically is the case that they are just used as a decoy to split votes per position, or used as just to sow discontent. But oftentimes, when candidates are nominated from the floor, they turn down the nomination. It seems to me.
Yes, mostly it will happen, especially at provincial conferences. But we've seen in Mpumalanga, the current Secretary General was actually nominated from the floor. He was voted, and then he actually surprisingly won the conference. So mostly in provinces, we've seen that sort of I deny nomination kind of thing at play. Nationally, in my years in journalism, yes, there would be one nominated from the floor, then it wouldn't really suffice, because the campaign wouldn't have really taken place. But those who would have been nominated prior would have had an opportunity to go to every branch and every region and every province to actually garner for votes, which is going to be the order of the day up until the 16th of December this year. So we're going to see more of these campaigns taking place. And of course, men will be demanding the very public broadcaster, SABC, to actually follow them every corner of the country. So it's interesting times that we're going to see come up, Oliver, building up to the 16th of December.
Just a final issue that, surprisingly, after the National Elective Conference in 2017, never quite happened, but there were murmurs of it, murmurs of contesting the credibility of the election in court. Typically, we see this happen at provincial level, provinces like Northwest, provinces like the Free State, as well as in Mpumalanga. It's typically where you will see, and even KZN to an extent, where you would see the results being contested in court, the losing faction obviously complaining that it was procedurally unfair and unsound. Didn't quite happen the last time. In 2017 with the National Elective Conference. And there the sentiment was that because it was a split factional result, each three positions went to each two of the two dominant factions, it didn't quite seem rational to contest it in court. But should there be an outright win by one faction or the other, that conversation becomes a more serious conversation, right? Is there something that, when you speak to branch members, when you speak to PEC members, is that something that they feel does the party good?
It's again a challenging state of affairs, because half the time there will be slates, and those who would have been elected then always preach this gospel to say, now we are a united front. Let's further unite the ANC and be a one, organization. But it never really gets to that point. For me, I've seen, instead of, even though you've rightfully pointed it out that there were two slates, and the leadership then was kind of split into the two different slates. But you've seen people contesting in public platforms, like showing their discontent with the leadership that came out of Nazareth. It was not even a month after the election we heard the now suspended Secretary General Ace Magashule talking about it's a matter of 4 years, 5 years, Makabane. So that unity that they continue to preach, even to say, okay, now we are one, the conference has spoken, this is the leadership that they want to see taking the party forward. They still those smaller corners of you've got your RET forces and all of those things. So really, I don't think they're doing well as far as the unity is concerned. It's a long way to go, and they still need to do more to make sure that there's unity within the ANC.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Abongile. Really, really do appreciate it. And we'll keep in touch, again, taking a look at these finer details that make up the bigger picture of the elective conference. Really appreciate it. Ruben Maleka is with me on the other side of this. PSA strike started yesterday. It quite surprisingly, it went forward. But importantly, what does this mean for the facilitated process taking place at the bargaining council with regards to terms of employment as well as the wage negotiations that are ongoing? Let's take a quick break. On the other side of this, we continue.
Disability Rights Awareness Month on SAfm. This year's theme emphasizes the importance of resolving existing barriers towards disability inclusion by ensuring resourceful, sustainable, and safe environments for and with persons with disabilities, and also specially recognizing that not all disabilities are visible. SAfm, we continue leading the conversation.
Every person, no matter who you are, what music you're inclined to listen to, and what you do with your weekends. You need a weekend playlist. It's that musical mix of music that accompanies the lazy weekends, whether catching up with friends and family or just taking some time to reflect. Tune in to The Soundtrack of Your Life with me, Ernest Pillay, Saturdays and Sundays, 1 to 4 on SAfm.
This Week Today with Oliver Dickson.
You are listening to This Week Today. My name is Oliver Dickson. We're taking a look at the biggest stories in the country and the world, shaping our politics, our lives, and our lived realities. The PSA has initiated their strike after having received, of course, a strike certificate. And this is in response to them not being satisfied with the wage offer by the state, 3%. Many of the unions are asking for inflation above increases, some going as far as 12%. But the state says they simply cannot afford it. Strikes often lead to some sort of compromise. But where is that compromise? What percentage? What are the terms that this PSA, which is the first union really to break out and strike, what are the terms that will bring them back to the table and suspend their strike? That is the question on top of everyone's mind. Ruben Maleka, the spokesperson of PSA, now joins us. Ruben, thank you so much for your time. Really, really do appreciate it. Let me maybe start there. What is the PSA asking for that will bring them back to the table and suspend the strike?
Yeah, thank you very much, Oliver. We are at a point where we were at a settlement range of 6.5%, which is one thing that we can also appreciate that is way below the inflation that is currently standing at 7.8%. So we have put that particular settlement in mind of that the inflation would be reaching 8 to 10% by the end of this financial year. However, as a responsible trade union and our members, we wanted to have a middle ground because we're coming from 10% demand, and therefore we wanted to find one another with the employer.
Yeah.
However, the employer is stuck on 3% and they're not willing to move.
Yeah. The state says that's all they can afford. In the medium-term budget policy statement, when the figures were being read out by Minister Enoch Godongwana, he said that's the 3% are factored into the fiscal outlook that he gave the country. Any movement from there will drastically change the fiscal outlook, he argues. He also says he doesn't want a strike. But speaking, for instance, at the South African Chamber of Commerce, event, he answered my question by saying that we need to distinguish between a willingness to pay more and an incapability to pay more. And he says unions are not making that distinction. Are you looking at the country's balance sheet and seeing that there's a sense of affordability there?
Yes, of course we do that. And obviously one thing that motivates us is that there's evidence that there is money on the balance sheet. It's just that the priorities are not meant for the public servants. You have seen, Oliver, just in a recent moment when the president gave the public office bearers, the ministers themselves, a 3% backdate for 2 years. A minister earns 2 million, none of them less than 1 million, but is not willing to give 3% without a back date to 2 years, just this year, for somebody who earns 200,000. So what is 3% of 200,000 and 3% of 2 million, which is backdated for a period of 2 years? And at the same time, you also look at, other.
But Ruben, is that a fair comparison? I'm sorry to interject there, but I want to ask if that's a fair comparison. And I hear the comparison. The sentiment and the optics of it matters, right? So does the value judgment of it. But we're talking about 40 plus odd ministers and deputy ministers against hundreds of thousands of public servants. It's not a comparison that's comparable. It's not something you can say, well, let's take the money we gave to the ministers as an increase and shift it to public servants. It just wouldn't make a difference.
It does make a difference. The employees are not employed as a group. They're employed as individuals. They earn individual salaries, such as a minister, whether they are 10 or 100, but they earn individual salaries. And the question is that if one can be able to show a case of saying that I don't have money, but I can afford to increase for somebody else who already earns 2 million, but I cannot afford to increase an increase of somebody who earns 200,000. It's a gesture and ethically leadership that must also prevail. So it cannot be correct to start saying, let's quantify who is bigger than who. Then we'll just go to disadvantage.
No, I'm talking about the scale of the money, right? The scale of the money matters. Let's say, and again, I might get the math wrong here, but let's say 3% increase for all the ministers amounts to, at an upper level, 30 million rand additionally as far as cabinet is concerned, right? Compare that to the 12 billion it would require for an inflation-adjusted increase for all public servants. 30 million is a far cry from, 12 billion.
That's the point. That's the mistake that we're making, because you want to compare the quantity of which group is what number. I'm saying individually people are employed as individuals. A public servant, one man, earns 200,000. A minister, one man, earns 2 million.
Yeah.
So if one has to be, if you have to take a decision of saying who must get an increase between the two, without looking how many ministers, how many public servants, what is the moral decision? Is to increase the person who earns less.
Yeah,
Because
Ruben, you win the moral argument. You certainly win the moral argument. There's no contestation whether or not that's an indication of what the sentimental priorities of the state and the president is. You certainly are on the right foot over there. But this is not a question about the normative assessment. This is a question about affordability. Remember, your response to my question around affordability was to say, yeah, we can afford. If you look at the priorities of the state, is that they're spending money on increases for ministers and not on public servants. Now, if we do, just to do the pure raw math, even if the president didn't give the ministers a backdated salary increase of 3%, they still wouldn't be able to afford, by their argument, to give a 12 billion adjusted increase for public servants.
But that's what I needed to give you a full perspective of why we say they can afford it. In 2020, when they did not implement Resolution 1 of 2018,
3.3,
they said, yes, they said that they needed to implement, that money would cost us, they would have cost the state 28 billion rand. So that money was never used because it was meant for that salaries and they did not implement. What was the amount needed to get to 6.4%, 6.5% was 24 billion rand. So they still make a savings out of what they could have implemented in the 3.3 resolution of 1 of 2018. So the question of affordability, it cannot be a question. Secondly, I always make this analogy that as a parent, how you behave when you say you don't have money always counts. Because here, it's not about also the issue of the salaries of the public office bearers. Just recently, the president also, and it was withdrawn because of our outreach. The one of also, again, coming back and say, I'm giving ministers and deputy ministers, in terms of ministerial handbook, free water and free electricity. The argument is, but what would cost? What is the minimum payment of? And we're talking about, basic resources that normal South Africans, I'm not talking about our members, normal South Africans are unable to afford. It's a gesture that shows that, are we now having a kind of leadership that is here to look after themselves, or are they here to lead us? Secondly, we have heard about the flag. I know you say 30 million. The flag that was supposed to be erected, South Africans were in outrage, and it was stopped. This week, you hear in Northwest that they've bought donkey carts for 45,000 donkey carts. I mean, just make a simple calculation. When I make calculations, the whole could have cost about 12,000. What is costing 45,000 rand? And you ask yourself, really speaking, are we at that low? It's not. It's many examples. You know, in COVID, in Eastern Cape, where they bought golf carts to say that they are going to carry people who are COVID infected with the golf carts. You know, there's just so many miracles that are happening in this country with the decisions that have been made by politicians when they plead poverty, but when they behave, there is no behavior that matches what they're saying.
So let's talk about what comes next. Will the PSA strike continue?
The strike will continue. Oliver, the problem with this issue of the salaries is that, and it's unfortunate and it's painful, that in this fifth term, and which is the President Ramaphosa's term, public servants' collective bargaining is under attack. We can see that, and we thought that is the president that comes from the trade union movement from NAM. We have pillars coming from SATU, obviously with Godongwana also with coming from trade unions. We thought they would have much understanding of trade unions and the plight of the workers, but it's totally opposite. In fact, they are here to destroy the gains of democracy to have trade unions, because the fair labor practices of the as enshrined in Section 23 of the Constitution talks about orderly fair labor practices, and the objectives of the Act talking about orderly collective bargaining. It's under the President Ramaphosa that today public servants did first time in history that the resolution was not implemented but withdrawn. Secondly, it is the first time in democracy that the minister exercised the power to implement a percentage without a resolution. That is a miracle, and it's really a 100-step backward to lead us to a new heights of democracy. In fact, we are retracting from the democratic principles, which is about orderly collective bargaining, and people must actually find one another and respect the decisions or the resolutions that are there. And it's amazing that in 2020, workers were robbed 5.4%. Today, the workers are again thrown 3% in their mouth, and next year, the employer is going to withdraw again the 1,000 rand that they are enjoying. So you can see that really the workers are under attack.
I agree with you, Ruben. It's out of the convention for a minister to announce a salary percentage increase, a wage increment that has not been resolved on. Minister Godongwana still cannot give a direct answer on that. He says it's all I can afford. He did this outside the ambit of cabinet. But on the first, I mean, it's the courts that set aside Resolution 3.3 of Agreement 3.3 of Resolution 1 in 2020 upon the application, I guess, of Minister Tito Mboweni at the time. The court said it's not in the public interest. The courts said that it was unfair, unconstitutional, and unprocedural because that same agreement was not signed off by cabinet at the time it was implemented. And was not signed off by the Minister of Finance at the time it was implemented. It spoke to collective bargaining not done correctly. You still argue that it is collective bargaining undermined?
Definitely. Remember, the courts were simply saying that there was non-compliance of regulations, meaning that they themselves, as cabinet or the minister in authority, has not actually followed the process, and which the process has got nothing to do with the trade unions. It's got nothing to do with how the trade unions can influence or remind somebody with his or her duties.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that the judgment, in fact, as you correctly say, it was more of moral judgment because there was too much sympathetic to issues of COVID and issues of saying people lost jobs. But the real issue is that one cannot argue that there was no money. you could remember in that particular period of COVID, I think around June, we got about 500 billion from IMF, or World Bank, and immediately today SIU.
No,
and,
not
and
quite.
the
There was never 500 billion.
Yes, but you remember there was a huge looting out of COVID, of monies of COVID.
Yeah.
That as we speak nowadays, if you go to, I follow SIU and on their Twitter every day on a daily basis. There's always reports about following up and trying to recover the monies. Then ask yourself, if that happened during COVID, and some are pointing to leaders and politicians that were involved in those kind of shenanigans, you ask yourself then, I mean, are these people really heartless and they want public servants to sacrifice? Or, it's only good when it happens to politicians, but when it comes to a little bit of affordability of public servants who sacrifice their lives, not knowing whether they'll be able to go back to their loved ones after work, the nurses, the police, the teachers, who during COVID, when everybody else was meant to be in the locked houses, they managed to go and treat people that were sick in the hospitals. But today they're told to be that, no, they don't deserve a salary increase. That is really sad.
Ruben Maleka, thank you so much for your time here on This Week Today. Really, really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you very much.
Ruben Maleka, the spokesperson of PSA. What do you make of that? Send us a voice note on 0614-104-107. We're taking your calls on 086-000-2032. The U.S. midterm elections is an important one. The Democrats can potentially lose both the Senate as well as the House of Representatives, only holding on to the White House. That makes for a chaotic environment for governance. We talk about that with Professor Inechos on the other side of this.
Here, there, and everywhere. SAfm 105.2 FM in East London. For unskippable, no clickbaiting, and cookie-free, with lots of real followers and likes, place your sales campaign on SAfm. Radio is still the best place to advertise your business at affordable rates. SAfm, with its national footprint and top personalities, offer advertisers distinctive opportunities to reach their target audience. Email sales@safm.co.za. SAfm, the influencer you can trust. If you're active on social media and love SAfm, we hope you'll take a moment to like or follow our SAfm page on Facebook and Twitter. These are the best places to find all the guest information, conversations, and stories you love from your favorite presenters, along with regular updates from SABC News. And don't forget, you can send your questions to feedback@safm.co.za. SAfm, leading the conversation. Oliver Dickson on SAfm.
Abortion rights, inflation, crime, gun control. These are the big issues that were top of mind for American voters when they went to the polls. Voting patterns shifting drastically, with younger voters coming in greater numbers, specifically in states where abortion rights is most contentious. Remember what the Supreme Court of Appeal did over there. The Supreme Court, my apologies, of the United States of America. It said that states should get to decide their abortion laws, especially in states where it was contentious the most. Women and young people turned out in their numbers, making a clear statement about what they think about the abortion rights and the abortion laws of that particular state. But things such as inflation, things such as the health and the shape of the economy also mattered in the United States. These are just but few of the issues that were top of mind for American voters. But what was also a big issue was whether or not the Senate would swing red, as well as the House of Representatives would swing red. You'd remember, for the first time in a long time, the Democrats had both Senate as well as the House, but also had the presidency. It is seldom the case that that happens, and they now have had it for the first time in a long time. They may potentially lose that at the conclusion of all the results of the midterm elections. States such as Arizona, states such as Nevada and Georgia are where results are still outstanding. The most interesting for me being Georgia, specifically because the candidate who ran on the ticket of pro-life anti-abortion was himself found to have paid for many of his mistresses to go get abortions. And that is Herschel Walker, running against a candidate, a Democratic candidate who really is shaping what the future of the Democratic Party is looking like, and what voting rights should look like, really protecting it tooth and nail. And importantly, making sure that marginalized people are able to get to the polls, and making sure that marginalized people do not miss out on having a democratic voice. And that is an important part of this election, right? But the question is, what does this say about American politics today? Is it still the bastion of democracy as it always positioned itself to be? Barack Obama coming out and saying this election is about democracy. This election has put democracy on referendum. Did it really? Dr. Ina Gous, who's a senior lecturer at the Department of Political Studies and Governance at the University of the Free State, is with us right now. Dr. Ina Gous, was this really a referendum on democracy, these U.S. midterm elections?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. I think it depends on who you talk to, of course, on which side of the aisle. But I think for the more liberal and more moderate Republicans, if you will, the liberal Democrats, who were very worried about some of the policies that came out in the past few months and years, especially during the Trump era, are relieved for this result, especially because it's a midterm that generally doesn't, bode well for who is ever in the White House. So there's instances where you can say that the majority of the country decided to largely discard the Trump-like approach.
Yeah.
The candidates that aligned themselves with him didn't do well at all. So there is, argument to make for that, yes.
Yeah. Importantly, there's also a conversation around the priority of the issues. Many arguing that, especially Republicans, saying, well, abortion rights really isn't a voting issue, but it turned out to be a voting issue. It means that they misread the room, quite frankly. What does this spell out for them for the upcoming national elections?
Well, it's like I said, the fact that they didn't do as well as they thought they would, even if they do win the majority in the House, which they are very close to. They have 211 seats now. They need 218. If the majority is not large enough to push through legislation that they want,
yeah,
it means that the administration at the moment has a very good gap between the aisle to negotiate with more moderate Republicans to get democratic policies through, which is what they didn't want. And as you say, certain things they didn't read correctly at all, especially abortion rights. I think even Republican women, especially young women, who came out in droves to vote in red and blue states, very clearly say that these are not things they want politicians to mess with. And that had a big influence on how well the Democrats did in the end.
Unlike a South African democracy or most moderate or most democracies around the world, the U.S. president doesn't have much power, it seems, right? Especially given that the Senate or the House of Representatives might be in control by another party. The last time they had the Republicans had the Senate with Chuck Schumer, for instance, as the head of the House, specifically in Senate, they couldn't pass a budget. They couldn't pass the national budget, and it brought the country quite literally to a standstill, where there was a threat of public servants' salaries not being paid because they couldn't pass a budget. Something as rudimentary as that. It's not something you can sign away by executive order. What will governance look like for Joe Biden going forward, should it be the case that the Republicans have taken over either Senate or the House of Representatives, or both?
Yeah, if it's both, then he's a sitting duck president for the next 2 years. That's just, and they really want to keep the Senate because their various decisions can still go through, especially with appointment of federal judges across the country, which is a big priority because, the conservative judges that Trump appointed during his time did real damage to a democratic view of the country. The big issue is that it's going to be more difficult for him to govern. Of course it is. You will know after the midterms of the Trump administration, he in the last 2 years had to govern with presidential directives that he put out one after the other, which was then challenged, either in court or wherever. I don't think Biden is going to go that route necessarily. Like I said, if the margins are close, he will have the margins to be able to negotiate. There are things that Republicans, for instance, would always have on the agenda in these negotiations, like border control and gun control, those things that they just won't budge on and would like to keep in. Tax cuts, for instance. They really had campaigns around Social Security and Medicaid, which they want to cut, which Democrats really don't want to happen, of course. So they will always put these things on the agenda when it comes to these negotiations. And it's going to be interesting to see how Joe Biden navigates that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Inachos. Really, really, really do appreciate it for your valuable insights. Of course, some of those results, like I said, are still outstanding. It should we should get clarity on them tomorrow. I think Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona, which is the furthest outstanding, by Sunday should have their results out.
And very, very important indeed.
Yes, those are important states because those are states that might determine the future of the Republican Party. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Inachos. Really, really do appreciate it. Thank you for your time, for listening this evening once again here on This Week Today. Again, you can follow me at Oliver_speaking on Twitter. That's Oliver Dickson on Facebook as well. Just search for it. And you and I can continue the conversation over there. If you've missed parts of the show, go onto our YouTube channel. It is at SAfm Radio on YouTube, on Twitter, as well as on Facebook. And you can watch back the entire show. But from myself and Lisiro, good night.
Independent and impartial. This is SAfm News.
Flooding in the Free State and major drug busts in Gauteng. Good evening. Large parts of the northeastern Free State are flooded due to heavy downpours. In Bethlehem, one of the malls has been heavily impacted by the overflowing water. Several roads in the area have also been closed.